start with some kind of, I call it obligatory questions, like, where are you born and raised, this kind of area.
Right. I was born in Italy, in a region called Romagna. The region is in central Italy. It's the part of the Apennines that goes from Florence across the Apennine, down along a river called Montone, all the way to the Adriatic coast.
Mm,
It's a region known for, it has a long history. It was at one point, I think, for 100, 200 years under the popes. So it grew a culture of resistance, of anarchy, because that was treated as an occupation, an unwanted occupation.
wow.
So it has a long history, and I come from the lower side of the Apennines. I was born in a farm, in a cottage
Mm,
near a village called Dovadola, near a major town called Forlì,
mm,
and that's where I grew. That's where I went to school,
mm.
and I left that part of Italy in the late 50s, 60s when I went to Bologna.
Okay.
And in Bologna, I lived there and studied there for a number
Mm,
of years until I decided to travel. It was a time when it was very easy, very adventurous.
mm,
It was called auto stop. You just lifted a finger and people picked you up.
mm,
It
mm,
was
mm,
uh, it was a wonderful time. You could go through cross borders, learn about different cultures.
mm,
I first went to France. I went to Paris, and after France came Germany, the area, North Germany, Cologne.
mm,
I spent some time there. I knew people there. I had made friends.
mm,
And finally, I arrived in London. And
mm,
there was something I liked about London. I think the interest had originated from reading books, Charles Dickens,
mhm,
um, and I restarted my studies in London.
mm,
I took my O levels, then the A levels,
mm,
and then I went to university. I was at Reading Universities in the 70s, where I started doing English literature. And then I decided I switched to politics. I became
mm,
very interested in politics. So there was a very interesting politics
mm,
department. I graduated there and I stayed on. After that, I stayed on. I moved back to London.
mm,
And in London, I set up a small, what was called the French theatre was very, very popular at the time. So I
mm.
set up a small theatre group called Bite
Wow.
Theatre Group. I was writing plays, directing plays. The company was made up of about 6 or 7 people.
Mm,
And we went to Scotland. We went to the Edinburgh Festival every year
mm.
until the early 80s.
Oh my God.
I staged plays. They were rather they were political plays. They were not
Mm,
a agitprop, but they
mhm,
tend to be dealing with issues which to me appeared extremely important at the time.
mhm,
One
mhm,
of the main plays we staged was about the coup in Chile. It was called The Bite, as a matter of fact. We
mm,
took it to the Edinburgh Festival. It got excellent reviews.
mm,
And we went on taking it on tour. We went through most universities in the UK. We went to Ireland. We went to Holland,
mm,
and fantastic time. It was a formative experience in many ways.
mm.
And following that, I still stayed on, then I became the correspondent for an Italian newspaper.
Mm.
And I started doing some work I had done some work for radio in the
mm,
UK,
mm,
BBC as well. And then uh, I started working for the television. I did a bit of television. I
mm,
did a documentary for Channel 4,
mhm,
which proved to be again another very important experience in my life. And it's still there. It's still going strong, after so many years.
mhm,
So that is the trajectory, from a small village in the Romagna region all the way to London, where
mm,
I'm
mm,
still living.
mm. I mean, I want to go back to, because I mean, it's fascinating. Like, I mean, I'm quite aware of the place where you're from. I think, so I know like Florence, Siena, Bologna. It's like Tuscany, isn't it? You call it.
It's the region next to Tuscany,
Okay,
is adjacent to Tuscany.
okay,
In fact, my mother came from Maradi, which is actually in Tuscany, and
okay.
it was part of Tuscany until 1926.
Oh,
My region was actually part of Tuscany.
okay.
The part of Romagna was actually a Tuscan uh,
Mm,
within the Tuscan region.
mm,
It became separate region when I think it was a decision by Mussolini taken during the
okay.
fascist regime
Mm,
to separate Romagna from Tuscany. But
mm,
originally it was Tuscany. Yes, yes.
okay, okay. So, like, I mean, when you were traveling those countries, like, I mean, Germany, France, it seems you were a very young man during that time, isn't it?
Yes, I decided to before I left it. Well, I traveled abroad before I did my military service, which was
Okay,
obligatory at the time. It was compulsory,
okay.
and I went back to Italy. I did. I think I was for 16 months or 18 months. I was in the
Mm,
army. I
mm,
became sergeant in the army.
mm.
That was in northern Italy, in a place called Belluno.
Okay.
Um, there was a tragic experience there because there was a dam not very far our from Belluno, not very far at all. And there was I think it was 1962 or 19, I think it was 1962 actually,
Mm,
that there was a massive tragedy there with hundreds and hundreds of people who died. And I remember one night, the night when the alarm sounded,
mm,
and we were called, and we were taken. Um, uh, Basically, it was a rescue operation.
mm, mm,
It was
mm,
only partly successful. It happened during the night, and it was so sudden. It was a tremendous um, tragedy. I think it left a mark really on me. It was one of those things. So, well, the region. So,
mm,
apart,
mm.
you don't know Belluno, you don't know that part of it. That is in northern Italy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was in the Alpini. I was in the
Mm,
Alpini. I had a hat with a feather. That
okay.
sort of.
But I mean, going from that very beautiful, picturesque town, and then you went to Paris. Paris is nice, and you go to Cologne in Germany,
Yes.
and then suddenly you came to like London. That's like Charles Dickens' London is quite, it's not a, it's quite a town to live in. It's not easy town. It's not
Yeah.
like, romantic. It has got lots of, capitalism, brutality, cheap labor, um, pollution, all kind of things, and the noise.
Well, this is what is so interesting and interesting about London. It has two separate faces. It has some of the best things and some of the worst things. You
Mm,
know, um, and the contrast is quite interesting
mm,
because you get some. Um, I mean, you get a living ancient history with a tremendous experience of uh, mm, at the different types of governments, philosophically, and an escalations of philosophical interest so different from the continental version, you know. And then when you start comparing the that particular cultural aspect of the country, and you compare it with the kind of culture you are used to, the kind of culture you come from, you get an interesting clash, a different perspective of things, which is always quite stimulating, really. And then you get the worst aspects to some extent, because it is, it was it was the empire where the
mm,
sun never set, that sort of thing.
mm,
It went through the slave trade, it went through occupation of
mm,
countries, exploitation of
mm,
people in various parts of the world. So you get that side of history
mm,
as well, and you get the two sides. The one that aims at perhaps at improving things, at working out solution to get a level of social justice. I'm thinking of the early stages of the Labour Party, for instance.
mm,
Um, but even prior to that, you get. I was very taken by Thomas Paine, by the Mills Brothers, by that
mhm,
sort of culture,
mm,
which then develops into people like E.P. Thompson, like
mm,
Hobsbawm,
mm, mm,
Um, it is all very interesting,
mm,
extremely interesting.
mm,
Um, so you get the two sides of the human condition ultimately,
mm, mm,
very stark way. And
mm,
London, as you say, uh, has these two aspects. You walk through
mm,
London, um, you find this incredible juxtaposition between people, yourself
mm,
being extremely kind, extremely polite, and all the rest of it, and then you find the opposite, um, an enormous amount of hypocrisy to start with.
mm,
The,
mm,
um, a social uh, the social differences are so stark, almost unacceptable, because
mm,
it's on your face, the kind of the difference between the working class and the sort of elite, and the system of education, which
mm,
separates two or three different categories in
yeah.
society, and one in particular which tends to dominate and dominate. But there is also resilience. There is also a
Mm,
history of independence. There is a history of mutualism. There is
mm,
a history of the cooperatives. I
mm,
was very interested in the oven type of experiences.
mm, mm,
And you get these fantastic historical moments. The Tolpuddle, episode,
mm,
and you wonder what this is a country that has gone through so many different experiences
mm,
and lived them in full.
mm,
We can
mm,
argue about the results,
mm, mm,
and
mm,
the interest is there.
mm,
You know,
mm, mm,
and the continent is more to do with with the French Revolution, or that sort of thing, and you really sort of semi almost stop at that. Then you get what happened in the last century, of course, right?
mhm,
But British culture has a variety of
mm,
incentives
mm,
in its
mm,
um, various aspects,
mm,
which I still find very interesting. Difficult, it's not
mm.
easy. It's not an easy place to live in,
No, no.
But at the same time, it's a challenge. It's a
Mhm,
challenge. That's what
mm,
London gives you.
mm,
You are
mm,
presented with a challenge, and then you can take sides.
Mm-hmm.
and there is, for the time being, almost sufficient, space to be able to express your opinions. Just, but now we are going through difficult times, as you know, so
Mm-hmm.
everything question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you mentioned about the best of our times and the worst of our times. I think that's like Charles Dickens, like A Tale of Two Cities. The
Yes,
first, I think that it starts with
indeed,
first line, yeah.
indeed, indeed, it's
um,
all there. Yes.
so I mean, in the same city, you can see, all those opulence, but at the same time, you see the resistance and then the working class, their sufferings, but also their, you know, it's like continuous fight to resist those people who are in power. So it's a continuous, like it's a kind of stage. You are a a stage director. You can see the stage is in front of you, and it's happening. And I'm pretty sure you. What's your memory when like Margaret Thatcher came to power?
Well, it was, well, in my opinion, then that's when it all started going. Um, it became Things became very difficult,
Mm,
really, and it brought about a sense of what we in Italian we call prepotenza, a sense of arrogance, really.
mm,
I mean, the Falklands War, if you remember, that sort of thing, that sort of jingoism,
mm,
uh, and also in society there were all huge problems. The miners' strike was a
mm,
typical
mm,
example. I mean, basically destroying a part of British society,
mm,
and to do with mining,
mm,
by the way, which had been an essential part of the Industrial Revolution,
mhm,
and
mm,
all of a sudden, that is all swept away
mm,
with such arrogance,
mm,
and as you know, things moved to the right. Um, what brought Thatcher into power were also forces which had to do with not just with stark capitalism, but
mm,
also with racism.
mm,
Um, it was a very disturbing period.
mm,
And, I was already a correspondent at the time, and I had access to Downing Street, right? And I found myself in the same room with Margaret Thatcher, because she was a very divisive character. Some people were absolutely in love with her,
mm,
you know,
mm,
absolutely fascinated um, by her style.
mm, mm,
There was something semi-androgynous about her. She was a woman, but behaving like a man. I mean, she was that sort
mm,
of person, you know. And you could feel that when in her presence there was an electric type of. She was to a
mm,
degree,
mm,
charismatic. Her eyes were incredible. I mean, you could see her eyes from a distance. They were bright blue, sort of
mm,
with a touch of azure. It was extraordinary,
mm,
and the way she behaved, of course, with such. Uh, uh, it was very unpleasant, but she also brought about what had been there and what was still there of the Mosleite experience. You know,
mm,
um, there were elements of the extreme right
mm,
in and around the government,
mm,
and in society. I mean, she encouraged
mm,
uh, a degree of I don't know. I wouldn't call it cruelty, but there was something cruel actually in the way
mm,
she adopted decisions which were detrimental to categories, entire categories of people. I mean, the miners. I mean, I mentioned the miners,
mm, mm,
but it's larger than that.
mm,
So you felt that something was changing. The atmosphere was changing. On the other hand, that sort of atmosphere which she brought about, which was aggressive, arrogant, and all the rest of it. For a time, it brought about what we were calling resistance earlier on. The fight against the poll tax, right?
mm,
The struggle, the miners struggle, the kind of support the miners got
mm,
from, from huge sections of the
mm,
population. You
mm,
know, that was an extraordinary thing to see. The demonstrations,
mm,
the coordinations. In support of the miners. From all over the country, the marches. That's where you felt the two sides of of the country, the culture, the clash of cultures there,
mm, mm,
at its most visible, at its most tangible. It was in the air, right? It was there
mm,
all the time. And you had also movements in the cultural um, arena. I mean, you had the punk movement, for
mm,
instance.
mm,
You
mm,
had that sort of effervescence, the sort of courage to come out
mm,
and present yourself for what you really wanted to be.
mm,
There was the LGBT movement that was very, very strong and very visible and very
mm,
powerful. So there were these forces which were coming about. There was the feminist movement.
mm,
It was flourishing at the time.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
you had these clashes of culture. One that was tending to oppress, to suppress,
mm,
and the other one that was resisting, that was coming out,
mm,
and with with um, uh, with a culture that was actually um, affecting other cultures on the continent, all over the
mm,
world. It wasn't a
mm,
small thing. It was quite extraordinary. The
mm,
amount of reaction, of resistance.
mm,
The God Save the Queen, and this that sort of the Sex Pistols. Let's put it that
mm,
way.
mm,
That sort of thing was quite extraordinary.
mm,
So it was still worth staying on
mm, mm,
because you didn't know which way things would go. You
mm,
know,
mm, mm,
it was quite exciting. You know,
mm,
given that when I first came to London, it was the time of the Beatles and da da da. Sorts of lovely songs, and romanticism, and flower people. All sorts of
mhm,
lovely things to see and to enjoy. Um, when these clashes came and they became so colorful, so powerful, so full of strength, force, to
mhm,
some extent of joy, because people seem to say, "No, we are no, we are resisting."
mm,
Thatcher out, out, out.
mm, mm,
And then, of course, you had the issues with Northern Ireland, which
mm,
could be seen, from different aspects.
mm,
That was a very interesting experience. No one says much
mm,
about it now, but that was the period, and it lasted for a
mm,
long, 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 long time
mm, mm,
when we had a degree of of tangible, palpable unrest. You know,
mhm, mm, mm,
with measures being taken, and then the justice system, which was so was hailed as one of the best in the world, began to take decisions which were obviously, that there was a hint of political
mm,
convenience behind
mm,
it all. Take the
mm,
Maguire Five, the Birmingham Six, that sort of stuff. It was
mm,
quite shocking things going on. It was part of the, let's put it that way, it was part of the questioning of the way society works or can
mm,
work, and
mhm,
to what extent people can be resilient and
mhm,
mobilized, you know, on the level of justice, of culture, of
mm,
politics,
mm,
and personal behavior, individual behavior as well.
mm, mm. I mean, I try to see through the political science lens, and like if you talk about the post-Second World War Britain, we are talking about the idea about cradle to grave, like, the state will
Mm.
take care of you, those kind of ideas, very kind,
Yes.
compassionate, caring state. And I think once Thatcher is there, that's the departure point. That, you know what? That's it. We are not paying for this. That's the time where the super rich decided that we are not paying any more tax for the poor people. Okay. So that's a serious change, isn't it? And she was leading that powerful force. I mean, part of me also see her as a, it's not easy life she was living. I mean, there's a continuous risk, personal physical risk as well. She could have been killed by IRA in like London. In other, I think there are a couple of attempts against her. So so this is not a normal prime minister. So first of all, she's woman, but she was not behaving like a traditional conservative woman. She was called herself Iron Lady, and she was leading country for a war. All kind of things, all kind of like the things like we talk about. This powerful country, empire, Zingoism, pro-war mentality, and also very very unkind to the people who are weak and vulnerable. And you're witnessing these things unfolding in front of your eyes. um it's exciting time, but do you think it was quite worrying time as well? Things can go seriously wrong.
Well, things went seriously wrong. Of course, it was seriously wrong. That's how the decline started. You
Hmm.
know, because after Thatcher, what did we have? We had Tony Blair. And when
Hmm.
she said that, I think she said one of the best things she did was to create Tony Blair, right?
Hmm.
Or words to that effect.
Hmm.
I.e., she actually she changed the Labour Party.
Hmm.
She brought it to the right, where
Hmm.
it stayed, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the kind of um, the kind of clash, the kind of oppositions, the kind of separation between what we called left and what we called right, became confused after
Hmm.
her. You know, if you think, I was here at the time when Harold Wilson was prime minister.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, and before Wilson, Ted Heath. That sort of. You could see that you could clearly see the difference, or in terms of interest. I mean, both were very cultured people. Ted Heath was directing orchestras, for instance. Harold Wilson was also an intellectual, and his wife was a poet.
Hmm.
The arts were respected. That sort of thing, and you could see the difference between the two sides, right? And obviously, you could see the difference between socialism and basically conservatism, the Tory
Hmm.
system with
Hmm.
and the capitalist system at work.
Hmm.
So you could still opt for choices between the two, right?
Hmm.
What she did was to reinforce the conservatives aspect of society,
Hmm.
reinforce the capitalist system, free enterprise,
Hmm.
and all the rest. And as you know, she hated the trade unions, as you
Hmm.
know. So she
Hmm.
proceeded to basically to attack them, to attempt to destroy them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which was again starting and then continuing with the miners and so on and so forth. So it wasn't a civil war, we cannot say that, but and she embarked in that sort of process,
Hmm.
and then it did affect subsequent governments, including and affected in particular the Labour Party. She brought things on the right side of on towards the capitalist side, the free enterprise, free market, and all that sort of stuff. obviously detrimental to large categories in our societies. That now we talk about the huge difference that is visible between the poor, the very poor, and the rich, and the very rich, the ultra rich. Um, these differences were subsequently exacerbated until they become entrenched now, and they are talking about London. You walk in the streets and you see right in front of you the difference which had come about. At the time, it was thought that there would be a degree of resistance, but then things moved on a geopolitical level with Blair and with worse things to come, the war in Iraq and all the rest of it. And the situation has never recovered. I mean, has gradually become worse and worse. And the difference in society, the division in society had become worse and worse. So it was no wonder, we are talking about Thatcher now. It seems to be a long time ago and away, but that's where it all started. That's where it all started. Um, it was unexpected. You see, she was also one of the first women to come, probably the first. She was the first woman prime minister. So and it became very confusing because on the one hand it was a woman and it was a very good thing to have a woman in government, a prime minister. On the other hand, um, what did it show? That the gender doesn't really matter very much. It depends on what kind of decisions you take and the view you have of society. If you want to improve the well-being of people, if you want to improve culture, if you want to improve your position in the world, to be respected and all the rest of it, then you have to take obviously different decisions because the decline. What is the reason for the decline? Things went gradually wrong. No, they took the wrong direction. This country is no longer what it promised to be, seemed to represent, you see, and which is part of the kind of how can I put it? It's a kind of um, disappointment, that has come about, that is evolving in a degree, disappointment and anxiety, partly because of the obvious differences in society which have come about, and partly because so many values have been put aside. The rich have become richer, the poor have become poorer. What society is this? The decline started then, and it has progressed, unfortunately.
I mean, especially like if you talk about the post Second World War Europe. So Europe obviously learned lessons from the Second World War, the destruction, the violence, the death, Holocaust and everything. So you start a new journey for your life, you learned your lesson. And I think by the time Thatcher and the other side of the Atlantic, Reagan came to power, suddenly they have got those things we try to forget. They brought it back with full force.
Hmm.
And I think the things we are now, it's almost like repeating history, isn't it? It's like almost like we are going towards that destructive journey, and then we know how this will end. And then now we can see like it's much. So if you compare like Trump and all those far right, the politicians are coming out in Europe and all over the world. And you can see it's the worst of humanities. They're bringing like very tribal, very, macho, very, very, unkind. And it's like, I'm not sure like whether the Darwinian kind of idea that it's all about the fittest people. If you're weak, if you're poor, if you are marginalized group, you will have no space here. So it's quite a thing to achieve within like 40, 50 years. after Second World War, we go back to the same cycle again. So that worries me seriously. It's not like what you are saying. It's not the end. It's the start, and then it will end somehow. But whether that end will be like more vicious, more violent, more catastrophic for humanity.
Well, you see, we were talking about the 80s and part of the 90s, and you may remember we were looking at the end of the century, or more
Mm,
precisely, at the beginning of a new century,
mm,
with great hope. You know,
mm,
we were looking at 2000 as a new start, right?
mm,
Um, and we were hoping to put us not to put aside, but to not to repeat. So let's put it
mm,
that way. The big mistakes of the previous century, especially we had that such terrifying lessons: World War I and
mm,
World War II. An estimate 60 million people killed in World War
mm,
II, and we thought that we had turned the page, or we were going to turn the page forever.
mm,
That starting with year 2000, we would look forward to a more serene, a more
mm,
just type of society,
mm,
because we were rich enough. We had plans to bring about a betterment in other parts of the world. There was a kind of seemed to be a global desire to
mm,
bring about more justice. Not to say sorry for all
mm,
the mistakes or the experiences with slavery and exploitation and occupation. Uh, and it turns out that this isn't the case. Um, I think it has to do with we weren't realizing that um, we were not sufficiently working on the importance of memory, of
mm,
retaining memory, and drawing lessons from the mistakes of the previous century,
mm,
right? Um, and so we entered into the new century, and what happens? A gradual, a very gradual disintegration of the value of trust. I mean, the Machiavellian virtue, uh, almost disappearing. Um, the maybe also through changes happening very, very quickly, very, very fast through different types of communication to different types of technology, which brought about a rapidity of issues, um, very, very fast changing in society, which we in the previous century we used to probably follow the events and have time to think about what was happening and to draw lessons from what was happening. And suddenly you have this rush into very sudden, unexpected decisions. And together with that, you have a more patent uh, evidence of people not telling the truth, of people in power, I mean, not telling the truth. So this the factor of mistrust into governments um, come to the fore, and then you have absenteeism during the elections. You have um, a feeling of not being valued in society. It's definitely feeling of not being able to trust people, because
mm,
you begin to learn, oh, they keep using language, repeating stories
mm,
which are to their advantage, not to our
mm,
advantage or the advantage of society. They
mm,
are to their advantage in order to retain power, to remain
mm,
in power. And huge dissatisfaction, which is
mm,
visible, which is tangible everywhere.
mm,
So, and then you have wars restarting, the most unexpected, in the most unexpected way,
mm,
really. Who would have thought that we would see the kind of uh, within such a short amount of time,
mm,
the kind of repeat of monstrosities, of bestial behavior that we hoped that would have, would never be repeated again.
mm,
You know, and this is profoundly shocking. I mean, I don't know how long it will take, if we will ever be able to come to terms with what
mm,
we are witnessing, with what is actually going on. You see, how would new generations will respond?
mm,
Uh, because on the one hand, as we can see at the present time, we wake up in the morning and we are constantly surprised about new events. The what I call, the very fast movement that we have around us, unpredictable decisions, um, actors coming on the stage who are, the Silvio Berlusconi type
mm,
comedians, actors.
mm,
Then I don't want to actually name too many people. I'll stick to the Italian name, which can be now emblematic of other characters we have on the stage at the
mm,
moment. You see what I
mm,
mean,
mm,
right?
mm,
And people find the situation extremely confusing, extremely upsetting,
mm,
because
mm,
when you start losing trust in people,
mm,
then whether it is at domestic level, at familiar level, at
mm,
this, with friends or people you know, but when you start actually not being in a position to fully trust the people who talk to you, who take decisions on your behalf, and so
mm,
on and so forth, that becomes very serious.
mm, mm,
So what all that will lead to in the next few years for the new generations, we have no idea. But on top of the loss of mm, faith in the news
mm,
we receive, the newspapers disappearing, a new mode of communication
mm,
coming to the fore through social,
mm,
platforms and so on and so forth. Uh, we have no idea what forms of uh, resistance will come about. Presumably, they will come about
mm,
because the situation is untenable as it is. We
mm,
can't go
mm,
on killing each other in the way
mm,
we do at the moment,
mm,
right?
mm, mm,
Uh, some sort of and I cannot see how, people wanting to join armies, to want to fight, to want to die in fields as they happened in the last century. What
mm,
for? What for? What? Who's deciding
mm.
that?
One of the things you said about, we are seeing lots of actors on the stage, isn't it? So like
Mm,
uh, recently, I just couldn't believe this. Things like you got like another country's president, like Argentine president, what's the name, Meli, and
mm,
then
yeah, yes,
yeah,
yes,
and then he came to you know like Trump's office, and then he was bringing this like chainsaw
yes,
and then
yes,
give it to like Elon Musk, and then they're showing chainsaw,
yes.
like, and they're saying that they're fixing things with a chainsaw. I mean, what is this about? I mean, so the very people who are actually, doing the destruction, they are saying that they will fix it.
Yes, um, I think that well, the chainsaw is a form of weapon.
Mm,
Um, eh, eh, so it wasn't a gun, but it was the equivalent in a way of a gun, right?
mm,
And then we had the fascist salutes as well.
mm,
It's
mm,
what is happening is that it's not that we didn't have forms of aggression um, to the extent that we had wars before. But I think these decisions or these expressions of power and violence
mm,
were probably kept in the background. They were kept in closed rooms.
mm,
It's not that they didn't exist, because we have had wars, we have had chainsaws acting in various parts of the world, and worse than that, you
mm,
know, remote controlled chainsaws, sort of.
mm, mm, mm,
Uh, so all that, I think, all that or part of that, or probably all of that, did exist before
mm,
in most of the countries, right?
mm, mm,
more or less more or less tamed, more or less used, but they were there because violence is part of the human condition, the human experience, right? What's the difference now with bringing, working on the example that referring to the example that you have brought, is that this is actually coming out in the open. There is no more, there is no through these new, more modern ways of communications, which are which involve a kind of exhibition, a kind
mm,
of spectacle, are brought actually out into the open.
mm,
An example, the very recent example was only a couple of days ago at the White House,
mm,
right? It's not that similar clashes or similar acts of aggressive behavior,
mm,
of considerations concerning violence, concerning
mm,
war, do not exist in London, Paris, or Rome, or Tokyo,
mm,
or Budapest, or whatever. They are there. They are talking. They are discussing
mm,
about these things all
mm,
the time, right? But this was hidden,
mm,
uh, from people. It never became a spectacle. It was actually considered secret. You don't know.
mhm, mm,
It's no longer the case.
mm,
Something is changing. All this is actually coming out into the open.
mm,
To what extent we don't know, because everyone is shocked by what we saw at the White House.
mm,
But
mm.
it's emblematic of a new type of behavior, of of um, of of the link between the spectacle and
Mm, mm,
the attraction of spectacle,
mm,
and the use of spectacle to gain votes, to gain consensus
mm, mm,
through
mm,
spectacle,
mm,
through a kind of dramatic demonstration. You
mm,
know,
mm.
um, uh, it's actually probably becoming now more and more um, uh, part of communication, which in a
Oh,
way some people say, well, these things were these attitudes, these interests, these plans to go to war were hidden from the public. Now they are coming out into the open. We see them on
mm,
the screen, right?
mm, mm,
Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
mhm.
I don't know, because acting in secrecy is equally dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. Mm,
So the chainsaw example is a crass, is a vulgar,
mm,
is a horrible way of saying, yes, we are sending out signals
mm,
in
mm,
in a way that everyone can understand, true to what is actually happening.
mm,
Because there are huge levels of destructions taking place, right? Whether it is to do with climate, or whether it is to do with reordering the geopolitical arena.
mm, mm,
It's actually there.
mm,
It's happening.
mm, mm.
But to actually have it put it across in that extreme way, something we are not, we are not used to, and that we find truly disturbing. Not that it didn't exist, the sentiments, you know, the
mm,
ugly aspects of decision
mm,
making,
mm.
which were secrets. Now they are actually coming out in a and some could say, you know, right, it's ugly, but at the same time, it's less hypocritical. You know, you don't have the Eton accent telling you we are going to, you know, to blow up places
Mm, mm,
or eviscerate children or that sort of
mm.
thing. You know, you don't. Um, it's there.
That's the like, I mean, that's the reality, that's the practicality of the situation. Eventually, war will finish, and then, but the problem is there are people who will mourn for their losses. But I mean, there is no, going back to those losses because these are done and dusted. But at the same time, the people who initiated, orchestrated, or mobilized, they will move on. They will move on. They will get Nobel Peace Prize. They will become like retired president. They will write books. They will be invited for talks and all those things. At the same time, we are coming to a point where things can go seriously wrong. So even if you make peace, there is no guarantee that will not destroy the planet next year.
Well, that's why I was referring to the previous century, because what you are saying basically is that we have not learned lessons from the past and we repeat them
Mm,
with very much of the same structures of the past. I mean, there hasn't been uh, the decision making process has not changed since,
mm,
you know, and that's how major decisions will be taken,
mm,
to do with war or peace. Obviously, we are all shocked because we can see that the same mistakes are being repeated.
mm, mm,
Um, when we thought that we would become wiser and we would
mm,
think more about, say, the health of the planet. We have people who still think almost in terms of exploitation, of economic gains,
mm,
of ethnic cleansing. Where are the wise people
mm,
in our societies, in our governments? Uh, so hence, you know, the lack of credibility, the lack of confidence. Who's gaining from this sort of setup? You know, there are people who are gaining money, who are gaining positions. So you know that there are people who maintain their power and their
mm,
interests to
mm.
the detriment of the vast majority of the people.
One thing
Of,
you mentioned about where are the wise men? Where are the wise people? I mean, what they're doing. I think the way I see you, so you are one of those wise men, were working quietly and then try to bring history back from like 1924 about this particular politician from Italy. Um, Tell us a bit of background, like, I mean, how you were interested and what really triggered you to like go back to those archive material and try to make a exciting exhibition to tell the history and to remind us that there is a serious danger.
I think what prompted my interest in Giacomo Matteotti has to do with the importance I attribute to memory and to resistance. And I often mention the name of an Austrian writer called Stefan Zweig. About 1940, he wrote that whatever people wrote, it no longer mattered much because events had developed in such a way that uh, war was becoming irreversible. The decision to fight, to go to war, was becoming irreversible. And in spite of so many people knowing that this might happen, they were time. The time came about when it was too late to change anything. Nothing could be changed,
Mm,
right? It was the people were brought on the brink of a precipice, and that was it. There was no way to go back.
Mm.
And Stefan Zweig was by then in Latin America, and he was so desperate when he realized what had happened uh, that he actually killed himself and his wife. He didn't kill his wife, but they decided that it was no longer worth living. Um, and then what comes up? What that means is that people, you have to go back to people like Giacomo Matteotti, who in 1924, even before 1924, he saw it happening. He saw that fascism was leading Italy towards a catastrophe that in due course might involve the rest of Europe and bring about uh, um, a human disaster, right? So he was one of a large number of people who saw what could happen,
Mm.
what the future could bring, but it was not sufficient to stop events from going in that direction and bring about a catastrophe, a human catastrophe, right? And so it is important to refer and to mention and to keep Matteotti in mind as one of the people who played the role of the canary in the mine, you know, rings the alarm. And he's so committed that he goes as all the way um, facing threats to his life, and in fact he's killed. He was assassinated in 1924, and now we have the example of a person. He was not the only victim, of course, but uh, whose example we have to some extent keep in mind, keep in memory at the forefront of our existence to some extent, because these are the warnings which we
Mm.
have to take into consideration and learn how to put some sort of uh, additional architecture to make sure they work to avoid further catastrophes in humanity, right? This is the importance of Giacomo Matteotti. This is why I think it's important to keep him at the forefront, to keep him alive to some extent.
Mm.
I mean, the message alive, and to follow his example. You
Mm.
see, uh, we when people ring the alarm, we have to listen. And number of people, as you know, who are ringing the alarm right now. People are talking about, look, if things keep going in this direction, there might be a third world war. Okay, so how many people are already saying it? What do we do about it? You know,
Mm.
to an extent, we have to try and commit ourselves to
Mm.
translate this form of alarm, this form of warning, into some sort of resistance, right? Tangible to the and it has to be there. It has to come about because it is a battle that needs to be won over the kind of characters we were talking about, right? This is the the main interest in this particular martyr, this particular
Mm.
hero. No, he was a perfectly ordinary person, a perfectly ordinary man who went all the way, and he was eliminated. That's why it is important to remember him.
I think, I mean, we can stop here today. Then we can do the rest because it's getting late, quite late as
Yes,
well.
yes, I agree. Yeah,
We have got some technical difficulties as well. So I'll try to fix like how much I got from today's session.
yes.
Um,
Have a look at what we have
yeah,
achieved so far,
yeah,
and then we update each other. Shall we do
yeah,
that?
yeah. Okay,
Okay,
okay. You
excellent.
take care. Okay,
Ciao. Bye
okay. Bye
bye.
bye.
Ciao.
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 Grazie.
That's it.
Votre toast, je peux vous le rendre, Seigneur, Seigneur, car avec les soldats